Jason Whitley came home one evening to find his pool completely drained, thousands of gallons of water stolen without a trace. The culprit? Agnes Miller, the self-righteous eco-savior of the neighborhood, who believed her crusade against privilege justified trespassing and destruction. But Jason wasn't about to let her walk away unscathed. What followed was a courtroom showdown you won't believe, where the tables turned and justice delivered a blow that left Agnes packing her bags in disgrace. Jason Whitley pulled into his driveway, exhaustion etched into every muscle. It had been another brutal day at the office, filled with endless emails, demanding clients, and a micromanaging boss breathing down his neck. All day long, the thought of his brand new pool had kept him sane. Just the idea of sinking into the cool water, a cold beer in hand, and the world melting away. That was all the motivation he needed to survive the chaos. But when he stepped into his backyard, that fantasy shattered like glass. His pool, his beautiful, sparkling pool, was bone dry. Completely drained. The bright blue tiles glistened mockingly under the fading sun. For a moment, he just stood there, blinking in disbelief, like his eyes were playing some cruel trick on him. He even rubbed them, hoping that when he looked again, the water would magically reappear. Nothing. Jason's chest tightened as confusion gave way to a cold rush of anger. He walked closer to the empty pool, scanning the area for clues. What the hell happened here? Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement near the fence. Agnes Miller. She stood there like the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, arms defiantly crossed, her smug grin stretching wider than it had any right to. Jason's blood began to boil. Of course it was Agnes. It had to be. He stomped toward her, his voice cutting through the evening air like a whip. "Agnes, did you drain my pool?" Agnes didn't flinch. She didn't even have the decency to look surprised or ashamed. Instead, she met his glare with a cool, almost patronizing expression. "Yes, I did," she said simply, her tone dripping with superiority. "We can't afford to waste water in times like these. Someone had to take action." Jason froze, his mind spinning with disbelief. She's joking. She has to be joking. But no, she wasn't. This woman, this meddling, insufferable control freak, had trespassed onto his property, tampered with his pool, and drained thousands of gallons of water because she thought it was her moral duty. His jaw clenched as he tried to process her audacity. The rage bubbling inside him threatened to explode. He wanted to yell, to curse her out, but for a moment, all he could do was stare at her, utterly stunned. Is she out of her damn mind? Agnes just stood there, completely unfazed, like she was the hero of the story. And in that instant, Jason knew. This wasn't just about water conservation. No, this was about power, control. Agnes Miller had decided she was in charge, and she thought she could get away with anything. But she was wrong. Dead wrong. Jason stormed back inside his house that evening, slamming the door behind him. His pulse was pounding in his ears, his fists still clenched at his sides. He paced the living room like a caged animal, too furious to think straight. Sleep? Not a chance. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Agnes's smug face, that self-satisfied smirk that screamed, "I'm better than you." Who does she think she is? He thought, running a hand through his hair. His mind spiraled through a highlight reel of every obnoxious encounter he'd had with her over the years. There was the time she left a note on his door, demanding he trim his hedges to acceptable neighborhood standards. Then there was the incident with his dog, Max, when she complained that his constant barking disrupted her spiritual peace. Never mind that Max only barked when someone trespassed near the property. And of course, how could he forget the weekend she called the police over a noise disturbance when he had a few friends over for a barbecue? The officers arrived only to find a few guys quietly drinking beers while country music played at a perfectly reasonable volume. Agnes had always been a meddler. No, a dictator with a superiority complex. But draining his pool, that crossed the line he never thought even she would dare to approach. This wasn't just another petty complaint or passive-aggressive note. She'd violated his property, his privacy, and his trust. The hours dragged on as Jason's frustration simmered into a dangerous resolve. By the time dawn broke, he knew one thing for certain. Agnes wasn't getting away with this. The next morning, Jason set out to gather intel. He made casual rounds through the neighborhood, striking up conversations with anyone willing to talk. Word spread fast, almost too fast. It seemed everyone already knew about the great pool draining incident, and unsurprisingly, they weren't shocked. "She's been pulling crap like this for years," grumbled Mark, the retired Marine who lived 2 doors down. "She thinks she's the neighborhood's moral compass, always telling people how to live their lives." Jason nodded grimly. "Did she actually tell anyone what she did to my pool?" "Oh, she bragged about it," said Lisa, a single mom whose kids often played in Jason's backyard. "She told a few people that she was doing her part to save the community's water supply, like she's some eco-hero." Lisa shook her head in disbelief. "She acts like she's the damn queen of sustainability." Jason's jaw tightened. "So, she thinks she's untouchable, huh?" He could see it now. Agnes probably envisioned herself being praised as a visionary for her selfless act. "She's been crossing the line for years," whispered another neighbor, "but nobody's ever stood up to her. Everyone's either too intimidated or doesn't want the drama." Jason's blood boiled. That's exactly why she kept getting away with this nonsense. She thrived on fear and compliance, on people being too polite to push back. But not anymore. Not this time. A fire ignited in his chest. She's not going to steamroll me the way she steamrolled everyone else. This time, she messed with the wrong neighbor. Jason wasn't about to let Agnes Miller walk away from this unscathed. This wasn't just about his pool anymore. It was about standing up to someone who had spent years intimidating the entire neighborhood. It was time to show her that actions had consequences. Determined and resolute, he contacted a local attorney with a reputation for handling property disputes and wasted no time filing a lawsuit for trespassing and property damage. The legal wheels turned faster than expected, and soon Jason found himself in a courtroom facing his nemesis. Agnes arrived, dressed as if she were going to a charity gala, her posture rigid with arrogance. She strutted to her seat like she owned the place, exuding an air of moral superiority that made Jason's stomach churn. He reminded himself to stay calm. This wasn't the time to lose his composure. The first hearing began, and Agnes didn't just deny wrongdoing, she doubled down on her actions. When her turn came to speak, she rose confidently, her voice clear and unwavering. "I acted for the greater good," she declared, her chin tilted defiantly. "Water is a vital resource, and we cannot afford to waste it on frivolous luxuries like pools. They are nothing but wasteful displays of privilege." Jason's eyes widened in disbelief. The nerve of this woman. He could feel the heat rising in his chest as he clenched his fists under the table. Privilege? The sheer audacity of her words was like gasoline poured onto a fire already raging inside him. She wasn't apologetic. She was proud of what she had done. She saw herself as a hero, as if she were on trial for saving the planet rather than for breaking the law. His attorney, however, remained composed. "Your Honor, this case is not about environmental beliefs. It's about illegal trespassing and property damage," the lawyer argued, with measured calmness. He presented the evidence, photos of the empty pool, security footage showing Agnes sneaking onto Jason's property, and testimonies from multiple neighbors. The judge listened intently, occasionally glancing at Agnes with a furrowed brow. As the evidence stacked higher and higher against her, Agnes's defiant posture began to falter. Gone was the confident eco-warrior. In her place stood a woman whose self-righteous narrative was unraveling at the seams. "Miss Miller," the judge finally spoke, his voice firm, "no one is above the law. You may have personal convictions about resource conservation, but that does not grant you the right to trespass onto someone else's property or cause damage. Breaking the law under the guise of environmentalism is still breaking the law." Agnes's face stiffened, her mouth tightening into a thin line. Jason watched as her confidence slowly drained away, much like the water she had stolen from his pool. For the first time, he saw the faint flicker of fear in her eyes. She had thought her moral crusade would shield her from consequences, but reality had caught up with her. The case turned decisively in Jason's favor. The weight of justice came crashing down on Agnes, and Jason could finally feel the tide shifting. She was no longer the untouchable neighborhood tyrant. Now, she was cornered, and there was nowhere left for her to run. The final verdict came down faster than anyone had expected. The judge didn't mince words. Agnes Miller was found guilty of trespassing and property damage. She was ordered to pay Jason full restitution for the water loss, thousands of dollars, not to mention his legal fees and additional compensation for damages. But perhaps the most satisfying part? The restraining order that forbade her from ever setting foot on his property again. Jason walked out of the courthouse that day with his head held high. He had fought the battle, and he had won. Agnes, on the other hand, stormed out with her lawyer, her face a mask of cold fury and humiliation. She avoided eye contact with everyone, gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. The woman who once strutted around the neighborhood as if she owned it had finally been brought down to earth. The next day, Jason stood on his front porch, sipping coffee as he took in the scene unfolding across the street. There she was, Agnes Miller, packing her belongings into a moving truck. Cardboard boxes were stacked haphazardly on the driveway, and a couple of workers loaded them into the vehicle. Rumor had spread like wildfire. Agnes was selling her house and leaving the neighborhood. Word was, the embarrassment of the trial had become too much for her to handle. People said she couldn't face her neighbors anymore, not after being publicly exposed and defeated. Jason crossed his arms and watched quietly, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He didn't feel the need to gloat. No words were necessary. The scene spoke for itself. Agnes was retreating in disgrace. Soon, a few neighbors began gathering around his yard. "Jason, you're a hero, man," Mark said, giving him a firm pat on the back. "No one thought anyone would ever stand up to her. You did what we all wanted to, but didn't have the guts to." Lisa chimed in, shaking her head in amazement. "Seriously, thank you. I was always scared she'd pull something crazy like that on my kids, but you showed her she can't push people around anymore." More neighbors came by, offering handshakes and congratulations. For the first time in years, there was a sense of unity in the community, like a weight had been lifted off their shoulders. The fear and tension that had loomed over them, courtesy of Agnes's reign of control, were finally gone. Jason soaked in their gratitude, but he remained humble. He didn't do this for recognition. He did it because it was the right thing to do. Still, knowing he had restored peace to the neighborhood filled him with a quiet sense of pride. That evening, Jason sat by his newly refilled pool, the water shimmering in the soft glow of the sunset. A gentle breeze rustled the trees, and for the first time in days, he felt a profound sense of calm. He leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath, letting the tension of the past weeks dissolve into the peaceful twilight. The cool water sparkled, reflecting the fading colors of the sky. Jason smiled to himself. Justice had been served. The neighborhood was finally free from Agnes's tyranny. And tonight, he could finally enjoy the serenity he had worked so hard to reclaim.